Rarbomb here with another 3D modeling for 3D printing tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to model up a Warhammer 40k power sword. Something similar to the way this one looks, but with a few more inquisitorial details. I want it to be a companion piece to the bolt pistol that I made a few weeks ago. I'm actually going to reuse a few of the pieces of this, especially the skull part. So if you need to, you might have to backtrack a little bit to see how I modeled the skull if you're trying to model every single part exactly as I'm doing it. So to start off, I'm using Blender 2.8 beta. I make sure to disable under units. I always set my units to none and set my view length to about 15,000. That can kind of mess up some stuff. All right, so the first thing I want to do is delete everything in the screen. Then I want to add a mesh, and I'm going to add a cylinder. And this cylinder, I want to be about 8 by 8 by 914. That's going to correspond to 8 millimeters by 8 millimeters by 914 millimeters, which is about 3 feet. The final sword's going to be about 3 feet long. So what this is this is going to be the piece that I use to cut a hole out of the entire sword. And this actually corresponds pretty closely in size to a 5/16 inch threaded rod. I'll even label it accordingly. You can find these rods at any hardware store, and they're pretty easy to cut with a hacksaw, and it's what I use to support all of the swords that I make. All right, let's just get started on making the blade. I'm gonna add a plane, scale it up a little bit. Then I'm gonna go into edit mode, move it over to the side here, add a modifier, add a mirror modifier, and a clipping. Move them together so they kind of lock together, like so. And then we'll start modeling up the actual blade itself. Just doing some extruding and cutting. How about there? Add a couple loops. I wish there was a good way to make these lines a little bit easier to see, but sadly it's not really that easy to do. About right about there. That looks pretty good for the blade. All right, let's tweak the point a little bit. There we go. Just doing some loop cuts, and we'll smooth this out a little bit more later on. Then in edit mode, I'm going to undo clipping, move it up a little bit, mirror on the Z-axis, and then redo clipping, and then extrude down. And delete the faces that I extruded. This gives me some thickness to the blade. I want it to be about there. Looks pretty good. So this blade's about 14 millimeters thick and about 5 millimeters thick. Might widen it a touch later on, but I think that's a good start. All right, now to add a little detail to it, I'm gonna let's make the actual blade point here. Actually, let's create one more loop. All right, I'll do that. I'll do it differently. Grab the outer edge, move it down a little bit. Now this doesn't have to be totally flat. It's good to leave a little bit of material there, so it's about a millimeter thickness. You're going to want it to, you don't want it to be a totally sharp blade. You can sharpen it a little bit more later on if you want to. Add some shape to it. If you want to make it more visible, you can pop up here, enable matte cap. Get a different look to the sword. This is just like a visual, something to work with it visually. My preferred is Studio under Color Random. Makes each object a different color. Kind of a random coloring. Just a little easier to see everything while you're working on it. So that's good for the blade. Now I'm going to add a little, what you would call a blood groove, although it's not technically a blood groove. Sword. I'll have it go up to about here, so add a little loop cut. Add another loop cut. Disable clipping. Move this over a touch, just like that. Extrude it in. Oh, make sure the clipping's re-enabled. Just like that. Hit F to fill. Right. I'm actually going to get rid of this bottom piece here. Then we are going to take this here and extrude down a little bit, like so. Scale it along the Z-axis, which actually acts to flatten it out a little bit, just like so. Make it a little thicker. All right, there we go. There'll be some additional tweaks to the blade. It's still kind of preliminary. But yeah, turning out pretty well. I'll move this down just a touch here. There we go. Now for the crossbar, I want to add a skull to it. And so instead of remodeling a skull, I'm actually just going to copy the skull from my gun model. Just Control C to copy. Move back in here and paste. You can also just model this up by hand if you want to. I just find this to be a lot easier just to, rather than redoing a lot of the work I've done in the past. This is just it's much simpler just to do this. And it gives me a little bit of visual consistency with my gun. There we go. And let's add a grip. So it's actually kind of a couple of fun techniques for the grip, but for now we're just going to do a simple cylinder right here. Let's make it about 25 is fine. Millimeters. It's about an inch. There we go. About 23. And for the crossguard, we're going to do the same thing. Add a plane. Move it down here. Mirror it along the X and Y axes. That's a good base for it. Might end up deleting this part afterwards, but that's okay. I'm going to fill this piece here in. That blade should be a little bit sharper. First sword I ever modeled, I believe, was either from Fire Emblem Or actually, it's probably Sailor Moon was probably the first thing I ever modeled. I think it was one of the Sailor Swords. So I still find it amusing. I've modeled Sailor Moon stuff more than anything else, and I still don't even know what half the stuff is I've done. All right, there we have a very, very basic short sword. This blade's about 2.5 feet long. It's a decent size. Should also be able to fit in a suitcase pretty easily. So for the crossguard, I think I'm going to do something kind of simple. I'm going to add a... Let's add a circle. Move that down here. So one of my favorite swords in World of Warcraft is the Gravekeeper, which is one of the artifact weapons from the previous expansion. And the Gravekeeper was kind of unique. The Frost weapons all had a really cool design. I really, really like the designs of them. They actually looked like close to real swords. They weren't absurdly large or over detailed. They just had a good sense of complexity. And one of them has a really cool design where it's like a circle like this, but it had a skull kind of floating in the middle. And so I want to replicate that. So I just extruded in the middle, scaled it down, and cut it in half right there. So let's pop back into this. Disable clipping on this part here. And do that. I kind of filled those in so they're still mirroring each other. So this, I think, is going to be the basic design of the sword. And I think I'm going to make the skull not symmetrical. If you don't have access to this skull file, you can also just model up your own. This gives you an idea of what mine looks like. Or another alternative is to just find a skull model online for free and use that one. I'm not trying to be super accurate with this. I just want something kind of skull shaped in there. There we go. So the support rod will actually go right through the middle of this. So the skull looks like it's kind of floating in the middle, which is going to be kind of a cool effect. So I had a blade idea, which is it would kind of evoke the Inquisitor symbol a little bit. With like the 3 lines kind of going off the side of it. That'd be kind of a cool effect. So I'm just going to duplicate this object right here. Then delete everything but one face. Scale it down, move it up, and mirror it on the y-axis. Enable clipping. Extruding that down. So I have this little like block like this. That'll be the middle of that. Go there. And let's make another one here. I'm going to duplicate this face. Create another one right here. I do let's see if I can find the right thing. Normals. It's not a bad idea to recalculate your normals sometimes, especially if you're extruding a flat plane. Otherwise, they can have some minor glitches. So that'd be kind of a cool effect to have it kind of mirror the Imperial insignia, or the Inquisitor's insignia with the lines here. Just kind of evoking that similar look. And it gives it a more mechanical quality, which I think is kind of interesting. Because it is, after all, a power sword. There we go. The other thought I had was to have these arranged this way. but I think like this is okay. Or have these be like this. Have those actually go back. Have this part be the larger part and these ones be the smaller part. They're kind of cool looking too. Because that would be a lot harder to do by hand. How's this look? Kind of like this look. This. All right, let's add a bevel to this. So add a modifier, bevel. Rather than have the bevel apply to everything equally, I'm going to hit tab. Tab and go to limit method weight. Open up this right here. And here's my bevel weight modifier. That way I can select the lines I want to bevel. Then add a weight by hand. Oops. Sorry, that was the vertices one. I want the edges one. There we go. Right about that. That looks good. So the little shortcut I'm doing there is I'm applying the scale with a Control A, because the scale will modify the bevel scale, so you can get kind of inconsistent results. So this width will be multiplied by the scale. So if the scale is something besides 1, 1, 1, it won't apply evenly. And I may go back and add more detail here also in the future. Let's add a couple also right here. There we go. That's a very mechanical look. All right, we're going to smooth this out a little bit. Adding a modifier, subdivision. Then selecting those two edges, adding a crease. And we'll also add a bevel to this as well. We'll do it with weight. Right about there. I might increase the scale of this piece a little bit also. This is scaling on the Z-axis also. A good way to correct for that is to scale it up and then just set the Z to 1 under your resize. Same with going inside. It's a way to kind of correct for that a little bit. There we go. So this right here means we're actually going to see the metal rod through here, which is fine. I don't think that's going to be a problem. This will even be able to spin around if I wanted to. Should be an interesting effect. All right. These here need to be bigger. Oops. There we go. You know, I think this part should actually extend out farther. This part here should be a little shorter. I think that looks a little better. See, I'm not going for a ton of detail in this thing. I'm trying to do something very, very simplistic. A little simple. So something kind of fun. I may just wrap the handle in leather rather than detail it. Let's add a little bit of detail to the top here, so it's a little more interesting visually. There we go. Let's add a. I could add another skull to the bottom if I want. How would that look? Duplicate this. Rotate it down. That might be kind of cool looking. A little basic skull. Yeah, well, it's a little too much. Let's do something very simple. Add a sphere. Right there. And let's cut the top off. Just hitting F, just fills it in. Gives me a nice little point right there. How about a cylinder? I think I like that better. Just deleting that interior face. Let's try a different thing with the grip. See how much I like this. So instead of wrapping it, I can 3D model like a wrapping. To do that, it's a little bit tricky. I'm going to add a mesh, add a circle, and make that circle vertices about 16. Scale it up a little bit. And we're going to do a very tricky little thing here. Oops. And make sure you leave that circle in the middle. Don't move it off too much. And we're going to call this the grip. And we're going to what's the best way to do this? Actually, we can just do it right here. Let's move that to a new collection. Grip. The reason why I'm doing that is because I want to be able to hide everything from the other collection, just with a simple click up here. All right, so I'm going to vertex select and see all the little pieces right here. I'm going to grab this here and we're going to move it up with the G grab button to about, let's say, here. Then duplicate it. Actually, before we duplicate it, we are going to go to from pivot point right here to 3D cursor. It means it's going to pivot around this middle point. So if I rotate, it rotates there. Then I'm going to take it, Control D to duplicate, rotate to about 45 degrees. Duplicate it again, do a 45-degree rotation, duplicate it again. So forth. You even select multiples if you want. Just like that. Then we're going to select the internal points like so. All right. Delete those vertices. Hit F to fill in the blanks. This goes as this little like clover effect here, or flower. All right. So this is just a basic line. We're going to add a modifier called the screw modifier. If you increase it, like so, you can get this cool effect like this. This can kind of replicate a wrapped grip, and you can 3D print it this way. So this is the amount it goes up. This is the angle of revolution, the amount of steps it takes. Disable smooth shading, so you actually see how it will actually print. You can increase the steps if you want it to be a little smoother. 16 should be fine though. I think that's a pretty cool effect. Kind of move it down here. Oh. Move the pivot point back to bounding box center. Rotate it. Scale it down. Instead of that, you can have it be this. There we go. It's kind of a cool effect. And we'll add a little bit more to that. So we're going to duplicate this grip and move it to a new collection called Backup. Hit OK. Then we are going to hide that backup. And then we're going to apply this. Now the lines are all applied. Now we need to close the top and bottom by selecting all those and hitting F to fill. Doing the same thing for the bottom, F to fill. And there we go. All right, time to add some details to this sword. I think first off, I'm going to add a little bit of detail to the blade, specifically some kind of power sword kind of detail parts to it. Make a few tweaks. I'm going to kind of move this up here a little bit, make this a little less pronounced, a little smoother. There we go. There'll be some detail without being as dramatic. So power swords have these little cylinders, essentially, that go up the blade, that function as a sort of like, I think they're the kind of power, they kind of like send the power through the sword itself. So I'll add a couple of those. This is just a little tube extending through it. Might have to make them a little asymmetrical too. Might be kind of interesting looking that way. Also has the added benefit of looking less like a real sword when I do this. As cool as realistic is, sometimes some cons get a little antsy when you bring in something that looks too real. Add a little cylinder here. Just rotating this here to kind of fit on the blade a little bit. There we go. That fits pretty well. There's like a little thing there. I might, if I print this out for myself, figure out a way to put some lights in here so I can actually illuminate it from the inside. But whenever you add lights to something, it adds an enormous amount of complexity to the final project, and I don't know if I'm really interested in that much right now. I'm going to duplicate this and move it over here. And extend it up a little ways. Duplicate this as well. Move it up here. I'm not too worried about making these right here too perfect, because I'm probably going to make it so they these print separately, so I can print them at higher detail. There we go. And if I end up not being happy with them, I can redo them. There we go. And I'll probably duplicate those on the other side. So, duplicate both of them. Let me rotate it. So, it's about a negative 180 degrees. I'm going to swap these over. I don't want them to be totally symmetrical. And these will be booleaned in there as well, so it's going to be a little bit more secure. Duplicate those. Might even go back and make these a lot less symmetrical later on, but for now I think this looks okay. I do want this to look like this. Again, this is another one of those boring, kind of silent parts of this 3D modeling process where I'm just kind of working on it. A lot of it's just kind of feeling out where the pieces should go. They don't have to go anywhere because I'm kind of doing my own idea with this, so I don't have to be super strict, which I think is my favorite part of it, but I just want to preserve some aspect of the canon. There we go. Kind of power sorting. So I got the idea of connecting this piece to this piece, kind of making it look like one big part. Might be kind of interesting to kind of connect those here, or at least kind of connect in here a little bit. Let's see what that would look like. So I'm gonna grab, let's say, I can add a loop, I guess. Add a loop there. Extrude this out. Maybe something like that. Not sure how I accidentally added a subdivision, but that's all right. It's kind of a weird little quirk sometimes. think I hit the short key for subdivision somewhere along the line there. Some really cool Power Sword fan art on ArtStation. And I was kind of looking at it while I was taking a little break from this and saw some really interesting designs. So I thought about borrowing some tiny aspects of those. Kind of adapting it to my idea here. Mostly just kind of realizing the sword itself looked a little bit too simplistic, so I wanted to add a little bit more complexity to it, just so it had a little more oomph. All right, so I want to mirror this little bit here onto this side here. So I think the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to duplicate the entire blade. Control D, and I'm going to pop into edit mode. This is my duplicated version, and then just select one of these sides. This gives me the same kind of like scaling of that part right there. And duplicate it and move it down here. Do Control I to select the inverse, delete it. So I just keep those duplicated faces right here. This is a way to kind of rapidly copy another design, or just an aspect of the design, and then start working from it. I do this a lot when I'm just working by myself. I don't like to do it with tutorials necessarily because it can get a little confusing. It's kind of like a rapid shift in what I'm doing. I'm not modeling it as much as I'm just kind of like slightly copying another piece of the model, which I guess is actually an important technique with 3D modeling. I'll put it right there for now. Maybe I'll add a little bit more here to kind of smooth this out. There, that's kind of cool looking. I may even add one more little layer there to kind of bridge it up. So I'm not sure yet if I'm going to add any detail here. I might make something or make this look kind of hollow so you can kind of see into it a little bit, or some like tubes or wires coming out of here to evoke the more power swordy aspect of it. Again, I'll worry about that a little bit later. I like to kind of go back and forth on the detail. Add some complexity, simplify it, add some complexity, simplify it. I'm gonna thin this out a little bit. And maybe make it a little bit wider. One fun thing about recording the process that I'm using for these for my stuff here is that it's actually kind of forcing me to be a little more economical with my time. Normally when I'm 3D modeling, I'm watching television or listening to an audiobook or other kind of distractions. But now that I'm just working on this and I don't want to have Star Trek: The Next Generation playing in the background, I think it's making me a little bit more economical with my time. There. I wonder how I like the idea of it being like this, where it's a little. I like that. It's like it's kind of built out of a bunch of small pieces. It's not quite as symmetrical that way. There we go. One thing I kind of do with Warhammer 40K, I may have mentioned in my other video, is, you know, there's some visual aspects of it that are kind of borrowed from kind of some unsavory places, unfortunately, because the universe is kind of itself a satire of fascism, but it uses a lot of fascist imagery in its kind of satire, and some of that gets kind of lost in the translation a little bit. So people may not be as aware that it's supposed to be a little bit of a satire. And especially the Imperium of Man has a lot of, you know, especially like the God Emperor memes and such. So part of what some of the thoughts is like, you know, there's a lot of skulls and eagles, and let's have some kind of, we'll say them, call them negative connotations in history. So I kind of tried to minimize the kind of having both of those visual ideas on something I'm making. Choose one or the other. Most fans of these things will know the difference. Will know that it's not, you know, not supposed to be Naziist, Naziist, but someone who's not a fan might mistake it, and I don't want them to ever think that. There we go. That's starting to look kind of cool. And another thing I was thinking is to add a little bit of engraving on the blade. And this would actually be a fun part of the video here. Something I haven't really seen a lot of people do. So I'll show you how to use a Boolean to engrave designs on the blade itself. To do that, I'm going to add a mesh, add a plane right here. And go to edit mode. I'm going to move it over in edit mode, then move it up in edit mode. This is keeping the center at the center point here. That way I can mirror it on the x-axis, then mirror it again on the z-axis. That way I can edit all four sides at the same time. Next step is I'm going to go in here to the solidify modifier. Make it about that actually solidifies it, so I don't have to do it. So it makes like a three-dimensional piece here. And this is just going to be for carving details. So if for instance, I wanted to have a couple designs here. I'm just duplicating this here. Let's delete those. So let's say I wanted this to start here and extrude out to here, extrude out to here. Have that one go down here, this one go down here, just like this. There we go. So probably wondering what does this do? Let's have it do just like that. All right. Now if I take this, keep that selected, and then select this, I can do a control minus using the bool tool function, which is built into Blender now. It will carve it out in the blade. So now there's like a little groove in here. If I want, I can add an array on the, say, y-axis and have multiples, like so. Which adds a little bit of like a cool little design here. You can see like the ridge design on the blade. And it adds a lot of visual interest and a lot of visual complexity. And it's kind of doing something that would be trickier to do without 3D printing. Since we have access to a 3D printer with all the magic, you know, it's not a bad idea to throw a few ideas in there. Make people realize you sort of earned it. All right, let's add a few more and see how this looks. There we go. That's kind of cool. So that's one idea. Another idea with this is to actually have it so I can use this to kind of like draw what I'm carving out onto it a little bit. Let's go there. Select this, extrude it forward. I'm just selecting the individual planes here, or the individual faces. Sorry, the individual edges. kind of use it to carve out a little chunk out of this right here. It gives it kind of a mechanical quality, a constructed quality. So I think I might just do that up the blade a little bit. And I might end up tweaking, if I end up doing a printed version of this, I might end up tweaking this a little more to get it to be exactly what I want it to look like. It's a little bit of a bump here because of this, the quote, blood groove thing, which is actually just used to reduce weight. But they've called it a blood groove by incorrectly for a long time. The good thing about using a boolean to carve up your item is that it's very temporary. So if you start carving it up and you're like, I don't like the way this looks, you just change the boolean, what you're editing with, and it changes the whole entire thing. You can delete it, you can hide it, you can have multiple versions of the same thing. You can even use a similar technique like this with the solidify tool and such to add some text. I've thought about adding some kind of Inquisitor themed text to this. Just not quite sure what would look good and be canon. There aren't really a lot of Inquisitor sayings that I've found in Warhammer. That's kind of cool. Something kind of dwarven about it now. Yeah, if I go to a matte cap, it really shows up nice and pretty. Oops. Especially the red. So this is a good tool to kind of pop in here, and it gives you a little bit more of an idea of gives you a different like look to something, so you can kind of get a different kind of feel for what you're working on. See it in a different light. I think it's kind of cool. I might end up dropping or modifying that detail a little bit so it has a little more visual consistency with some other aspects of this project, but it's one way to do it. And if I want to get rid of it, I can just go in here and delete it, and it's gone. But I'm just going to delete it for now. I wasn't super happy with the way it was looking. And I may add some stuff like that later. And let's add some more detail here. I thought about adding a little plate right here. Just something like that. Oops, get rid of this extra bevel in the middle there. There we go. Reduce the bevel on that part slightly. And there, I think that looks pretty good so far. All right, I was gonna tweak the this piece down here slightly as well. So I think when I print this, I'm going to print this piece and this as one big large part. So it needs to be able to have enough of the support rod in there to be secured, but it doesn't need a ton because it's not going to be really supporting much weight. So I can actually have it be hollow in the middle, like so, and have it evoke some aspect of the design look of this up here. So it's kind of a duplicate of it. I'm going to delete this outer piece here. Let's do that. I think that looks kind of cool. I'm going to add a bevel, just like up here. For you apply bevel, always make sure your scale, which I have not done correctly, looks good. Because the scaling modifiers will affect how the beveling looks. Could probably even leave that metal rod. This is going to be that 5/16 inch support rod in the middle. Could probably just leave it there. It'd be kind of cool to have a little, you know, intertwined metal rod sticking through it right there. Could be interesting. If it's not, I can just, since it's just going to be this one tiny little piece at the bottom, I can always just reprint it if I want to. Is that a loop cut? And another loop cut. Select the faces here and scale it out. That way it's a similar look to this up here with this part here. Just kind of like echoing the design a little bit, but not going to be too different. Let's add some bevel weights. Bevel these 3 edges. Yeah, it might be kind of fun to put like some text right here on the bottom. The other cool thing about having a little loop here is it gives you something to kind of tie some like ropes or strings to, or like some kind of like like the text they always have kind of flowing on their armors. You have it kind of hanging off here instead of it actually like the actual purity seal just kind of hangs off there. It might be an interesting look. The other cool thing about that is you can also make that a place to kind of put a loop in there so you can actually carry it around the con without having to actually carry it around. If you don't have a scabbard, you have something to kind of hook it onto, or to hang it up on your wall if one is so inclined. Let's see how I'm going to try a look here and see how I like this. I'm going to extrude the whole entire thing up. Some very strange behavior on the on this. It's all right. Oh, I see. Creases are beveling's just being weird. I kind of like that as more of a hammer look to those edges. Not quite as strict. It looks uneven though. I don't know if you can tell here, but it looks like it's not really flat. Oh well, it looks fine. There, I think that's a pretty good amount of detail. You can always go in here and add more detail later. I can even add some like a text. It goes in here, and I can make the text actually separate. So if I wanted to if I want to add text to this here, let's just use this as an example. Here's a little trick I've been developing a little. So this is where the text is going to go. So I'm just going to duplicate those pieces, hit P, separate it by selection. This makes a duplicate of the blade parts right there. And take it. Now I can like move it out if I want. Extrude it down a little bit to make like this little like plane thing that would then insert into here after you print it out. The advantage of doing this is you can get, I think a lot about the way I'm going to print this piece. So the blade, I'm going to have it printing up. So this is going to be the Z-axis is going to be moving up along the blade here. That gives me a lot of detail. And then these parts I can print flat, which would allow me to have some like good text detail kind of carved in here, or some other kinds of detail. It's just like a way to break up the design a little bit. Or I can just paint it a different color and drop it in, or do anything interesting with it. Let's add some text, and I'll show you how to really quick. So to do that, you just go add text. Text insert's very small by default. Gotta move it up here. There's a lot of different fonts. You can go select whichever one you want. I'll just use the default font for now. Let's see. All right, time to find a good bit of text for this. So I think I'll just use something very simple for the text. Xenos Malleus Hereticus. Oops. All capitals. There we go. And this font's not my favorite for this, but it's kind of the default font, so it's all right. And so what I want to do here is I can edit the text over here on the right. There's some different alignments. You can select your font here. You can load in fonts. So the default font here is just B font. That's the internal Blender font. But if you want to select a different font, you can just go to the font page here, open up, and then navigate to your Windows font folder. And you have a bunch of different options here. Biggest thing to remember is that like very, very complicated fonts like this Coalition one, or anything that's like really curvy, is going to be a little too complicated for what we're going to be trying to do. So you want to stick to something kind of simple with a little bit of detail like this one right here, but you don't want anything just too messy, or else you're going to have some potential problems. So I'll just use this one right here. And I'm going to make one quick change to this here. I have it just come down to right here. And I'm going to tweak this model a little bit. It's kind of hard to see what I'm doing, but I'm basically going in here and selecting this. I want to actually put a kind of a wall on it a little bit. We can deal with this right here. This is probably something I'm just undoing something I did earlier. I'm going to delete those. It's very hard to see. I'm selecting this face, collapsing into the wall, filling in the back, filling in the front. That way I can move that front piece up to here, so it actually has something to kind of insert into rather than be flat all the way down. That's just a visual option, but I decided to kind of go with that. All right, so now if we're back to the font here. So I have a duplicate of this piece right here, and I don't need it to mirror on the Z-axis for now. And I have this font right here. So I'll copy it out here. I'm going to duplicate both of these to show you what I'm doing here a little bit. So first thing you want to do is if you hit Tab, you can edit the text. Once you're done, and you want to actually use this as a Boolean, you're going to hit Alt-C to convert it from mesh, or from a curve to a mesh, or create a mesh from a curve. And you go back into Tab, and you can actually see the individual polygons that's kind of built with. And that way, that'll let you actually create a Boolean that'll carve this up here a little bit. So if I say add a solidify modifier, the thickness to there or there, I can either have it add to it so it's like a raised text like so, or I can have it kind of sunk in here a little bit and do Control or Shift click, then a Control minus, and have it carve out instead. So it's like now it's actually carving out of this right here. duplicated that again. Control C to convert it to a mesh. So I move it up here a little bit. You can kind of see what it's done. It's actually carved the text out of the mesh, and it looks pretty good. Now, whenever you're dealing with like a Boolean with a lot of like little individual tiny cuts like this, I recommend being kind of cautious with it, because you can get a lot of like weird polygon errors. That's why I was saying, like, really complicated fonts can be a problem. But this should be all right. The only thing I guess I kind of want to tweak here a little bit is if I print this out, these right here are going to print separately, and I want them to kind of line up. So I can just do like a little fill loop tools bridge. That'll kind of bridge that little piece there, so they'll print together. Actually be kind of lined up there correctly. Do the same thing with the A here. And that should be the only real major problem. It's just like whenever you're dealing with Booleans and fonts, sometimes they just get a little weird. So you got to kind of be a little cautious what you're working on, and really want to make sure you test print, or at least before you send a file out that has a lot of fonts like this, load it up into your slicer software before you send it out, and to make sure it actually works. Another thing you can do is actually select the thing here and go to clean up and hit like delete loose in case it has any loose polygons, or mesh, clean up decimate geometry. Make this like a 0.95. This will remove just a couple extra polygons if there's like polygons that are almost identical in size. This will just get rid of a few of them a little bit, or simplify it just a little bit. And there we go. So now I don't need all of these here anymore, but I can keep them if I want. Let's move those to a backup folder and then pop this back down. This also has the added advantage of making it very easy to sand this text. So what I can do is I can paint this part here, like the sword, gold or silver, paint this here gold, or the inside under this here gold, down here gold, and then paint this right here in like a silver or something like that. And so you have like, it'll look like it's kind of like a lot of detail in the painting, even though it's not. So it just like becomes very, you can just sand it nice and smooth. This right here is a lot easier to sand than sanding out little grooves here. Just from my experience, it makes it a little simpler. And you can also swap out the text here if you have like an alternate text for something. You just think, oh, I'm gonna make a new version. You make a new version and just plop it in there. It's pretty easy to do. So I'm just moving this up here just a little bit. Slightly more alignment in the middle. There. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Do you know those are the titles of the Eisenhorn books? Alright, any other details I want to add? Before adding detail, I'm going to clean up a few of these pieces here. I want to be able to add a subdivision to this here, add a little complexity to it. So I'm going to need to go in here and highlight the edges that I don't want to subdivide, so I can keep it kind of sharp. But also it'll smooth out this curve just enough to make it so we don't have to actually manually model in everything. There we go. Now it's a nice smooth curve. We'll do the exact same thing for here, I think. This one might be kind of a pain because of all this, because it's built into that. Well, if I wanted to smooth this out manually, I can. Let's move this to here. Add a polygon there. Add one there. Rotate it. When you're 3D printing, you have to keep in mind the resolution of your printer, and also the fact you're going to be likely sanding these. So like really, really high polygon models are kind of pointless because you don't need this thing to be like, that's a perfectly fine smoothness for the size this is going to be printed at. You don't need it to be really technically need to be that smooth. As I've said before, a lower poly count just makes everything work a little bit better. I had one more idea for a detail that I wanted to add, and this is the idea I had using a plane to carve out some detail in the blade. This kind of came to me a moment ago. I thought it would be kind of interesting looking. So we'll see how it looks. We're going to mirror it on the X and Y axes. Add a solidify modifier. Make it about 2 millimeters thick. There we go. So I think about having these like trace down right here and go up the length of the side of the blade, then hook over here. Might be an interesting little visual detail. So I'm going to go ahead and see how that looks. So at this point, I'm probably mostly just going to be adding very minor details to this project. So if you just want to see how it's sliced up, I don't think I'm going to make any major changes to the actual geometry. So you can probably skip towards the end where I connect all the pieces together and get it ready for 3D printing. But if you want to see my little process here for how I detail, this is it. It's kind of boring. This is the part that can take sometimes days. I'll spend days just trying to get these details just the way I want them to be. Because I could have it be like this maybe. That might look okay like that. Let's see how it does. And I thought about having it come into the middle here a little bit. And go forward like so. And then out to the sides. Make sure these don't overlap. That can cause you some geometry headaches in the future. There. Let's see how this looks. So that's my, it's going to be my negative. So I'm going to have that line selected. Let's go ahead and label this here. Blade grooves. It's not even the right spelling of grooves, but whatever. The blade. Text. Alright, so I'm going to select the blade grooves here, and then the blade, and then do Control minus, which will carve it out. Hopefully that worked. And then I'm going to move that blade grooves polygon to a, I'm going to call these bools. These are my booleans. I can kind of hide those on another view here. That way I can hide them from my main view when I don't want to see them. I always want to see the actual blade as it exists. And I think that's actually a really cool look. It's kind of a subtle effect. It's going to be on the edge of the blade, so it's not too dramatic. Adds kind of a mechanical quality to it. Well, that's a union, so it's actually kind of puffing out. I want it to be a difference. So it carves. There we go. It's a little closer to what I was thinking. There, that's going to be an interesting look. I need to tweak it here at the end a little bit. That way I can just click my bools to re-enable it so I can see it. Gonna move it in here. So it actually kind of looks like it's carving here a little bit. There we go. Let me try something here. Get an idea for something. How should I do this? Here we go. I'm just going to delete this and redo it. So I'm going to flatten this, extrude it up a little bit, then add a piece like this. That way I can duplicate it, like I was talking about earlier, and do like a little finning bit of detail. That'd be an interesting little bit. Then hit F to fill these lines in here. Because I have my Boolean set up a certain way, I can just kind of like take a look at it, see how it kind of looks. There's like an interesting feathering effect. I think that's kind of interesting. Might be too complicated, but whatever. It's just a Warhammer power sword. All right, I think that's pretty good on the detailing. Perhaps I'll duplicate it on this side. Yeah, might as well. Grab my bools over here. We'll do the same thing on the other side here. Duplicate this, scale it this way. Whenever you do a negative scaling, make sure you go to mesh, normals, recalculate outside to make sure those normals are facing the correct way. Otherwise it can cause some issues in the future with how it prints. Let's have it right there. There. So this is blade grooves are carving out this little part right here as well. So again, this is one of those things to make it so you can kind of lie a little bit, and people will have a harder time. It'll look like it's 3D printed more, so have a kind of complexity that you mostly see in a 3D printed item. You wouldn't see in a handmade item as much. Potentially, it's not always the case, but if you're going to 3D print it, you might as well make it look like it's... Might as well exploit the strengths of 3D printing if you can. There we go. That's kind of a cool effect. I like it. Might even go through and add some lines here too. For example, let's duplicate this. Control D to duplicate it. And call this one crossbar grooves. This just duplicates, so I can just duplicate the settings. Then go into edit mode and select one of these faces. do a Control-I to inverse the selection, hit delete. So I only have this little piece right here. So if I want to, I could continue the slicing here. Now you have to have a little bit of foresight here. I know I'm going to end up merging all these objects together. If you have a lot of like lines that are parallel to each other, like so if these things are connected, but they're on the exact same plane, when you add them together with a Boolean, it can cause some just very odd behavior. So you want to be careful with that. It's kind of hard to describe exactly what I'm talking about, but just sort of trust me on that. You don't want it to... You don't want to do more than... You don't want to have those problems pop up on you. That's kind of cool looking. A little mechanical... Yeah, I might go back and make them so they're all they're connected. That might be kind of an interesting effect, actually. But I am not gonna sweat it right now. I've said a billion times, this is my favorite part of the process. Just kind of sculpting with lines and form to see how it all kind of births itself in a way. Select these here, duplicate it, move it up to here. That's kind of cool. That might be too much detail. Might be getting a little complicated at this point if I'm doing it this way. I'll get rid of that top one. Two's fine. Or you can duplicate it. Yeah, if I want these to merge in the middle, it can get kind of get a little complicated actually, because you have to have it be a single object. I want a middle one. So in order to do that, I'm gonna have to actually apply these modifiers. So actually, I just want to apply the Z modifier. Yeah, just the Z modifier. I'm going to apply that, add a new modifier on the X-axis, so I have it so it duplicates over here. Then I can select this, delete it, and have a middle one here. And kind of line it up. So there's three there. That kind of echoes the three little lines from the Imperial insignia. I'm sure they mean something. I don't know what that is. And there we go. That's kind of cool. I think I'm done. And so the final part here, we will slice up this file into small pieces, but first kind of combine everything together into one big, like the different chunks of the file. So those, I want to do some final details before I actually get to the slicing. Kind of realize I missed a few things. And I had another idea here is I'm going to make this here, add some symmetry to it. So I'm going to unmirror on the Z-axis, hit apply, then remirror on the Z-axis. That way I can pop into here, and I'm just gonna delete all of these. About to there. Grab this here, try something like this. I think that'd be kind of a fun, be kind of cool looking. Too much symmetry sometimes. I like symmetry, but if you have like little breaks to the symmetry, it gives kind of an interesting effect. Can make things look a little more professional sometimes. Or it can make it look really lazy, like you just made some big mistake. But hey, what's art without the possibility of failure? It's kind of boring. Those edges. All right, see how this looks. Kind of like that. Just a little detail flare at the end. Makes it kind of unique. I'll always know this version's mine. If anybody copies it, I know they copied it from me. Unless somebody else out there already has this exact design of their own. I'm just copying something I saw a long time ago. All right, another thing is I want to be able to make these printable. This is going to be like a little printable separate thing. I'm just going to have like, I'm going to print out 4 of these. So add an array. 4, that's just going to be how it's going to actually print. Add a new collection, printable parts. Just gonna pop down here. Hide that for now. And then I'm gonna combine all of these. I'm just gonna select all of them and do Control J to join them, like so. So now they're all the same object. And that will be important here in a second. And I think I'll do the same thing with these. Control J. Now they're all the same object. So now I'm going to start thinking about how I'm actually going to slice this thing up into small pieces. I'm going to want the support rod to go down to about here. I don't care if it pokes through that much. I'll have it go to about there. That's fine. Top of the blade. Right about there for now. That's fine. All right, so start thinking about what size printer I have. That's the important thing. And one way I can kind of like visualize the print capacity is to actually create an object that's equal to my print space. And this here is roughly equal to my TAS 5. All my TAS 5 is actually slightly larger than this. So that's like a TAS chunk. So when I look at this part to print, I can actually take a look. Let me double this actually. Should be 250 by 250 by 250. I can actually get an idea about how big these pieces are when they actually print out. I can know if I'm going to cut this out in my TAS 5, I know that this is going to be a piece, this is going to be a piece, this is going to be a piece, like so. That makes it just fantastically simpler to print. We know exactly how big your printer is. Keep in mind you can also rotate if you're printing flat on your printer. However, I'm going to be printing a lot of this on my Lulzbot Mini, which is a really small printer, because I have a lot of orders on my main printer, so I need everything to be able to conform to this smaller box, which will actually be a little trickier than I anticipated, but I should be okay. So let's start cutting it up for that. First thing to do is I want to combine all the parts together that are going to need to be combined. This here I'm actually going to probably... I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to add another cylinder. Make it about this big. rotate it, scale it up, like so. And I am going to combine this cylinder with this, like so. And that should be a good, that way it's like a solid piece in the middle there. And to actually have it insert into there, I need to be able to slice it a little here. So let's take this here, duplicate it, get rid of those aspects of it, get rid of the mirroring. I'm going to get rid of those outer edges. Oops. Delete the faces. So that way I just have this inner line here. I just want to be able to copy this. Scale it in just a tiny bit. And fill it. And just like that. And I should probably do a face, sorry, mesh, normals, recalculate to make sure that's okay. And then take this, select the skull, have it be an intersection Boolean. That way, the edges here should line up pretty well with up here, so it should just slide right in there pretty simply. So I can print the skull out separate and detail it and paint it up separately. Or have swappable skulls, have different ideas for the middle. Those will all work pretty well also. That might have been a kind of complicated design, like operation there, but I think hopefully you guys will have figured out what I did. All right, now I'm going to combine the grip, which I think is going to be everything from this to the tip of it. So I'll attach everything to this centerpiece here. So take this, Control plus, take this here, how about this here, plus, this here, this here, so moving all the I'm turning all these little different separate objects into booleans essentially. So this can actually be moved up for now. Don't need to worry about that. I'm just gonna make these part of the blade. That's the easiest thing to do. Add a plus. Move those two bools. And I want this to be a negative because I'm actually going to print these parts out separately and then attach them in there. Just make sure they're in the right place that I want them to be in. That'll be a little on the blade like that. There we go. There we are. And there we go. All right. I want to make these all just a tiny bit larger. So I'm going to go to individual origins pivot points. Hit S to scale and just scale them up just a tiny bit like so. And then select this and hit Control minus to carve them out. Now we have these nice little holes in there. And there's the blade. Here's the skull. Main blade. Grip could probably just be like that. That's probably just fine. Oh, I did notice one little tiny mistake here. See how this kind of flattens out right here? I want to make it so it's not doing that anymore. So I can just go into my bools, select the object, like so, and move those points so they're not overlapping anymore. There we go. I'm not sure how happy I am with this pommel yet. I don't know if this doesn't quite like it matches very well. Let's try to do some detail work on here to see if I can make it a little more visually interesting. That's kind of interesting, I think. Yeah, that works. I like that. Do the same up here. There we go, nice and detailed. I'm going to combine this little piece with this bottom part. Control P. All right, so I'm going to have the grip be a piece. Pommel, grip, crossguard, and blade, and skull are all their own parts. And then this piece here will also be its own part. So to slice this part up here, it's actually a pretty simple process, which I will get into here in a second. So before I slice this, I think I'm going to make a few tweaks to the size of it. I was kind of realizing this is going to be a little small. It's kind of scaled for like a 4-foot sword, but I want this to be like a shorter 3-foot sword. And so it's just going to be a little bit tiny, so I need to adjust the scaling. First thing is the grip needs to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to scale this up about 28 or so. Then I'm just going to have to go through here and tweak the sizing on a lot of these parts. Good thing is, since everything is just a bool, it's pretty easy to just resize it. I don't have to actually go through and tweak it too much. There we go. I'm actually going to move this here to... Actually, let's make the rod unselectable so I can't accidentally click on it. So maybe I'll just scale the whole entire thing up a little bit here. Make sure everything's selected. Scale it up by about 20%. Shift it up a little. And I'll move the blade down a little. So I kind of got shifted here. Scale these up a little also. Yeah, biggest problem with the scaling is you have to kind of realign all the little parts, make sure everything works okay. A lot of sort of tedious work. I think we're coming out all right. Oh, that's annoying. Make sure the Z and X axes are all aligned. Scale it evenly. That's my fault. Another one of those kind of boring to watch processes, but when you gotta clean up a file, you gotta clean up a file. Go. While I'm here, I make one adjustment to this piece here, and I had kind of an inspiration to kind of make this a little bit more pronounced here, like that. There we go. Probably have to completely adjust those right there, unfortunately. Let's see how it looks now. Alright, that looks good. It's supposed to be like a short blade, so I want it to be a little... I don't want it to be too far off. I'm still seeing some asymmetry here. I messed up my scaling here when I did this, unfortunately. So sorry if this is hard to follow. I don't know how often I've printed out a project and realized I messed up like aligning two pieces because I scaled something wrong or I moved something wrong. Ended up messing up an entire project, so I have to go back in and fix it, and I've had to resend files to people a couple times. Oh, there's a glitch. I'm gonna do this. Oops. Normals, recalculate those. That's slicing a little bit better now. Right there. Yeah, it looks pretty good right there. I think that's all right. And I'm going to mirror it. Apply the rotation and apply the location. Mirror it on both axes. I think I'll do the same thing with this. So all makes sense in a second. Just a little bit of cleanup I should have done a while ago. X and Z. Apply the location, scale, and the rotation. So it's flat and even right now, but that's okay. I'm just going to apply it. Grab this top one here, this bottom one here, move them both to, say, right there. Apply this also. Do the same thing for this and this. Let's unselect those bools, save it again, see how it all looks. So I think it's a little bit better scaling. The blade's gonna be pretty thick, but I think that's kind of a cool look because of it's got that kind of Warhammer-y mechanical look. Let's scale this part up here a little bit also, one more time. There we go. So the reason why I'm kind of scaling up these parts right here is in case I want to wrap the blade with leather, instead of, if I don't like this texture, I can wrap it up and kind of hide the leather inside the grip here a little bit. It's a little, basically, it gives a little room to tuck it away. There we go. That's a better looking blade size. You will note I am Control S, S-ing constantly to save. I've had stuff fail and lost hours of work before because I wasn't paying enough attention. Probably a better way to scale this. Well, actually, I know there's a better way to scale this, but it's a little too late now. Yeah, let's make it a little taller. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. Oh, interesting. So notice some bad geometry here. See this little flickering? So I'm going to delete that. Wow, really bad geometry. That happens a little bit with, say, with bools. You just get this like weird, yeah, there's a little overlapping geometry here. It's a little obnoxious. I'm just going to delete that and rebuild it. Kind of eyeball it here a little bit, see if I see anything else like that. Little extra lines like that. Nope. That can also be the result of the decimation process when I do that decimate to clean up the file. There. That looks so good. That looks pretty good. There we go. All right, now to slice up the file, I'm going to slice it up for a actually a small printer, possibly. Although it might be, that might make it too small. I'll just do it for my big printer for now. So, I think I'm going to do this, make this a very, very simple object. This here could be right there. Have another one there. Another one there. I think that's a good size for the blade. The way I'm going to do it is first apply the scale of that part. Then I'm going to add a Boolean to this cube here. Then have it be a intersection between it and the main blade. So it only shows what it's intersecting right there. And then I'm actually going to move this to printable parts. Unselect it so I just see the blade pieces right there. So that's about 250. That'll be a decent sized print. And the reason why I'm slicing it right through the grip right here is so there's no support material. So when this thing prints, I only have to clean up this little middle line here. I'm not going to have to do any weird geometry things here. This is still kind of strange, this little bit here, but you know what? I don't think that's going to matter that much. Yeah, it's not symmetrical. I'll fix that later. That way, when this prints, I won't need any support material for this part here at all. This is actually, this little curve here is actually, will be support material, won't even be necessary for it, like really, because it's enough of a curve. There are no like overhanging detail parts here that are really going to get caught up. Maybe here I might have to add something that might be a little tricky. So if I want to get around that, make it stop cutting right about there. Good sized piece. And move this one up here. I was a little worried about this little slight overhang here. If I print it up this way, it won't be as much of an issue. I might still use support material for this part just for these little circles. Might just need a little touch of support material, but it's a lot less than having to use it for that whole part. Let's make it about there. Let's do the tip here. So the tip I'm going to print flat. So that's a little trick there also. Is if you have a, in this instance, a 250 by 250 printer, you know, that might be the square, but if you're printing it flat on the print surface, like so this is the top of my printer looking down, that's actually how big the part can be. So that top blade piece could actually go from there to here if I wanted to. When in doubt, make it a few extra pieces just because it is kind of handy in case you have a print failure. It's kind of nice to be able to reprint just a small piece as opposed to a bunch of big pieces. And there are all my blade pieces. The grip's fine as is. And I can just probably duplicate this. Call this the pommel. I should pop up here and name it. That's probably misspelled. I made a joke about it in one of my other videos, but I actually failed spelling once. I'm that bad at it. intersection. Move it up to about there. There we go. And I'll just print 2 copies of that for the blade bottom part. I'll just duplicate this here. Change this to skull. Slide it up there. Here's that middle piece. Duplicate it. And slide it down on the Z-axis. I can't see super well where it's intersecting, unfortunately. There we go. Doesn't have to be super exact. This is fine, just like this. There, that's good. There, 2 halves of the skull, 2 parts of the pommel, blade pieces. The tip I'm going to have to cut in half also the same way. Duplicate it and move it on the Z-axis down. I can just do it in here. It's a little easier to see. Apologize if this is moving really fast, but once you kind of start doing it, I think people get the idea about what you're working on. So there's the sword. At least all the major pieces. Call this words. So the words, this one's actually only 250, so I can print that out on one printer. You can also cut it in half the same way you cut in half everything else. If you're going to cut it in half, though, I'd cut it between the letters or along edges, anywhere that makes it a little easier to clean up. I find kind of in the middle of a flat plane to be the easiest place to clean up stuff like that. So this one I can just duplicate it and move it straight over to printable parts. Now we need the circles here. I must have deleted them. We'll just remake them really quickly. They're not that complicated. There's 100 different designs for these. Let's try to look up some... oops. What did I do? Oh. It's invisible. There it is. So let's try to look for some canon of what these little parts are actually called. I'm not sure. I get bored sometimes and I just read the wiki for Warhammer 40k. If you're trying to get into a new fandom, or at least trying to understand it a little bit better, it's kind of nice to read the wikis, see how it all kind of fits together. These bizarre, grim, dark universes. Let's make it look like... How about that? Add another little loop in there. It never hurts to be complicated when it can be. Every level of complexity you add, though, makes it that much harder to sand. And if you know me, I hate sanding. Try to limit that aspect of it. I'm going to duplicate that, move that to printable parts. Then undo the rotation. Create an array. And have there be 4 of them. I guess my duplicates there. Move that there. Duplicate that. Control C to convert to a mesh. Add a modifier. A little bit of an array there. Oh, there's a little bit of rotation on that. That's why they're off-centered a little bit. Which is totally fine. Alright, and that is the completed little blade tutorial. Actually, wait, I forgot one thing. It is not completed. There's no support rod running through this right now. So let's go take a look at that support rod. So that's the rod as it exists right there. And that should be a good length to capture all the pieces. So all the little individual parts will connect through there. And so we need to just do a little Boolean on all these individual pieces. Okay, so another reason why I add it with that number, it makes it really, really easy to just edit it right in there. It's always going to be the first thing that pops up. Boolean rod. I kind of want to check to make sure it works okay. And at this point, you could cut it up. Any of these projects, you can kind of cut into however many ways you want to do it, however many versions you want to do it. There's no strictly right or wrong way. There's just kind of preferred methods. Like one option here is I'm just doing this slicing to preserve like the kind of the detail of the part. But if I want, I can move the slice like here, which would make the rod go through this here, and this just glues onto the back. That might make it slightly more secure. It doesn't really matter. They're just two options doing the same thing. And Boolean. So many Booleans. And there we go. That's it. Let's do some final arranging. Convert it to a mesh. Let's rotate all these pieces for printing. So the last thing I always do is I like to rotate the parts and arrange them in the exact method I'm planning on printing them. It helps me kind of visualize the project a little bit better as a final piece of art. It's also probably nice for you, so you can kind of see how it would arrange for me. That's one of the good things about the new collection system in Blender 2.8 is it makes it very, very simple to very quickly visualize exactly what you're doing here. So you can actually make a collection and call it your 200 millimeter cuts. Then you have another one that's the 250 millimeter cut. So you have a different version for every single type of printer. And as someone who makes kits for people, it's actually really nice to be able to have multiple options. And it makes it really nice in Blender just to be able to organize all those multiple options simply and easily and clearly, like so. I would call this my 250 millimeter version. And that's it. So that is my little Inquisitor sword. I hope this was a fun, easy to follow tutorial. Hopefully I didn't go backtrack too much on it. It's a little bit jumping around because I kind of like kept changing my mind on how certain parts want to be put together. And at some point you can return. Hopefully I will have this printed out and finished. I think this would be a fun little companion to my gun I made earlier. If you have any suggestions or comments or complaints or criticisms, let me know. And I will continue to make more of these videos. Thanks for watching.